She tells me. She tells me. We communicate once in a while. Okay. All right. I'd like to start because unfortunately I have to leave a few minutes early today because of unfortunately a funeral. So why don't we get started, everybody? First of all, I just want to welcome you all back. Missed you over the summer, but I hope you had some time to relax and get some time for yourselves. We're now in Chodesh Elul, and it's a time to really try to refocus our attentions. It's an especially difficult Elul because of the war that still rages on in Israel, and our hearts and our thoughts are all focused on what's going on there. So let's dedicate our learning for the safety and security of our people, and especially for Refuah Shlema for Binyamin Ber Ben Chana. So with that in mind, I want to just spend a few minutes, because I do have to leave early today, just want to spend a few minutes on the Kuzari, just to bring us back to where we were, and maybe talk a little bit about, once again, Sefer Yetzirah. We had begun this conversation before we took a break in the summer, and that is that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is decidedly not a rationalist when it comes to many ideas within Judaism. He's known by a lot of scholars as a proto-Kabbalist. What we mean by a proto-Kabbalist is before Kabbalah was a big thing, was a popular thing. There were a series of great thinkers already starting in the early medieval period, as early as the 8th or 9th century, that were already discussing Kabbalistic ideas. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who now lives in the 11th century, very much subscribes to many of the Kabbalistic ideas having to do with Sefirot, numerology, gematria, the various different emanations that are discussed in many of these texts that ascribe a certain kind of hierarchical structure of emanations that come from God into our world, and describe in very great detail, but in very cryptic detail, how God brings about all of existence. One of the works that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has access to is a book called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation. And one of the reasons why studying Kuzari is valuable is because among the great Andalusian scholars of the Middle Ages, probably the Rambam and many of his ilk are known to be the great rationalists. Rambam, Ibn Ezra, Ralbag, even that comes after him. They're basically rational thinkers. They're Aristotelians. They believe in that the models that are set up by philosophy are the models to subscribe to. And they don't believe in this kind of melding of heaven and earth, that of the metaphysical existing in our terrestrial plane. And the whole endeavor of Kabbalah is to suggest that there are many things that are invisible to us that exist on our plane of existence that transcend the natural order. That's not something that we would be used to hearing from someone like, let's say, the Rambam. Okay, and because Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam are almost contemporaries, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is the generation before the Rambam. It's refreshing to see this back and forth exchange of attitudes that is already circulating in the 11th and 12th centuries, and that continues really to this day, this back and forth between rational thought and scholasticism versus this transcendent thought that is contained in Kabbalistic and then later Hasidic writings. Okay, and so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is embraced by this contemporary Kabbalistic and Hasidic world, because he's the sort of one of the forefathers of this type of way of thinking. So in his discussion of Sefer Yetzirah can be best described as an instruction manual that God used to create the world. And Sefer Yetzirah details how God utilized the letters of the alphabet, positioning them and configuring them in different ways in order to construct the universe. Science talks about how the universe is comprised of atoms and subatomic particles. And Sefer Yetzirah describes how this universe is built on the letters of the alphabet and other ingredients. We'll see that, and the 10 sefirot, the 10 emanations. Once again, if I could ask everybody to please, I'll just mute everybody, but if you happen to by accident get unmuted, just try to remember to mute yourselves afterwards. Okay, so that's where we were, and what we were reading is that there was a quote, which we'll start from on page 455. Based on the very unique character of the Hebrew language and its supernatural quality, it should not seem strange that holy names and the like written and spoken in Hebrew can have an effect upon creation, provided that their utterance or writing is preceded by the proper mental measurements. We're on page 455 in the Kuzari, in the Feldheim edition. Just if you want to let your friends know, there was recently, the Kuzari was republished with slight revisions. So it's now readily available again, and also in the compact form. So if anyone's joining this class anew and you want to get your copy, you can just go to feldheim.com and order your copy. The compact edition, I think, is something like $25 US. And you contribute to the Koropkin Scholarship Fund. Okay, some small way. Okay, by this we mean that the words must be accompanied by the thoughts of a pure soul that resembles angels. And so here, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is referring to is the art of theurgy. What is theurgy? It's the ability to manipulate nature in a supernatural way through incantation and through the utilization of the Hebrew letters of the alphabet configured in a certain way. This is not something that is subscribed to by a rationalist. This is something that you really have to be a Kabbalist in order to believe can have an effect. Yeah.
Okay, I remember I love this conversation because quantum physics has shown like positive words going out to the universe has a positive effect scientifically.
And can you elaborate on that idea that you're Rachel saying that physics has shown?
Okay.
Is that?
Well, I can't speak really as physics, but there has been the studies of positive language even to plants.
Oh, okay,
so
right.
I think the incantation and how thoughts and speech create worlds can be proven scientifically.
Right. Okay. So language can influence. Quantum physics basically says that you need a human observer in order for physics to work the right way, or the way that we perceive that it works. And otherwise it doesn't work. It works in a completely different way. But here Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is a particularist. He's saying it is specifically the Hebrew language configured in certain ways that can have an effect. And those words and those letters configured in the way that they are also have to be accompanied by a mental process. And if it's not accompanied by the proper mental preparation, then the words don't really have the same effect. By the way, let me just also point out that this can be translated in many different ways, including the way that we pray. When we daven, we can have a profound metaphysical effect using this school of thought, provided that our words are accompanied by the proper kavana, the proper mental preparation. Yeah. So it is in this way, the three Samech Pei Reishes. So remember, we had started off, this going back, I don't expect everyone to remember this, but Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had quoted from Sefer Yetzirah, that there a quote from Sefer Yetzirah, that one of the teachings of Sefer Yetzirah is Sefar, Sipur, and Sefer are sort of the building blocks of how God created the world and are brought together as one. Thus, the imagined effect which this pure soul mentally measured and of which he spoke and wrote will come into being. So the word, the shoresh, samech peresh, safar means a mental thought. Sipur, like, because when you're sofer something, you can count it, you can take a mental inventory. Like, for example, if I have a bunch of coins on a table in front of me and I want to be sofer, I want to count them, I can count them mentally. So that's the first part of samech peresh, is the mental inventory. Sipur, samech peresh, also relates to verbalization. And sefer means to inscribe it in a book. And what Sefer Yetzirah is describing is a process that goes from the abstract to the most concrete. That you take something that starts in the mind, you verbalize it, and then you concretize it further by putting it into writing. And that's descriptive of the creation process, how God took things that were from the metaphysical realm and concretized them by using his dibur, by saying the words, the 10 utterances that brought creation into being, and then concretized creation further by recording everything in the Torah. Okay? Accordingly, Sefer Yetzirah describes how God created the universe with the three Samech Pereshes, Sefar, Sipur, and Sefer, and that all three are one vis-a-vis God. Turn the page, we're on page now 456. This conglomeration gave rise to the 32 mysterious pathways of wisdom. Sefer Yetzirah describes the 32 pathways of wisdom, which is a very cryptic statement. Where do we get the number 32? Well, what word has the gematria of 32? Lev, which is the heart, and that the heart represents the most authentic and core reality within the human being. But there are 32 mysterious pathways of wisdom. Where does the number 32 come from? It's the 10 sfirot, the 10 emanations that come from God, that are the sort of the means whereby God brings emanation into our world, plus the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. These are allusions to how all things came into existence and how they are bounded both quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitative distinctions are defined by number. Our number system is mystically based on the number 10. We have a decimal system. And that's, by the way, if you go back to the very beginning of the Kuzari in the first essay, one of the ways that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was able to argue for the unity of mankind. Remember, one of the things that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wanted to discuss was to try to prove, so to speak, the historical accuracy of what the Bible teaches us, that at the beginning, all humankind was found in the Fertile Crescent of the Levant in the Middle East, and we dispersed after the story of Migdal Bavel, of the Tower of Babel, right? One of the ways that he was able to argue for this is that the uncanny phenomenon that no matter where human beings live, we may have different languages, but we all have the same numbering system. We all work with the decimal system. How did that come into being? And it's Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's conclusion that it must be that there was some consensus arrived at early on in human history when mankind was first united. Otherwise, why would everyone just spontaneously agree. If we started off as disparate tribes, and there was never a time when we were really united, why would it be that there would just be this coincidental consensus that everyone has a decimal system of counting? That when you get up to 10, you start again with the number 1. How does that happen? Right? So an anthropologist might argue and say that that's not necessarily a proof, because you could say, well, they came to that consensus because people used to count on their fingers, and everyone has 10 fingers, right? So that's how we all came to the consensus of using a decimal system. But you could say, well, then why not have a system of 5 and count on one hand? Why not have a system of 20? Because you can count your fingers and your toes, So Rabbi Yehuda Levi's argument is an argument. It's not an absolute proof, but he argues that when we look at this fact, we notice that everyone uses the decimal system. It is mystically based on the number 10, as it says. There are 10 sfirot. That there are 10 sfirot is something closed, that is mysterious. 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. This is just a direct quote from Sefer Yetzirah. And as we've made note in the past, the text of Sefer Yetzirah is extremely cryptic. There is therefore a hidden secret as to why the number system is based on 10, no more and no less. And that is why it says afterwards, understand with wisdom and become wise with understanding. Distinguish and investigate them. Know, consider, and allegorize. Make sure the matter is clarified and return the creator to his place. The system of numbers is 10, which spreads to infinity. In other words, once you know a decimal system, the decimal system can be used to get the largest, incredibly large numbers that spread out to infinity. So we don't know what to make of this paragraph, but our focus is only going to be on this phrase that says, return the creator to his place. Return the creator to his place is a very strange kind of statement. What does it mean, return God to his place? And that leads the Otsar Nechmad and a number of other commentaries to suggest that what it means is that there's an inherent danger when we look into Kabbalistic writings such as these. One of the reasons why it seems that the Rambam and the rationalist school did not subscribe to Kabbalistic teachings is because it creates a sense of multiplicity within the Godhead, if you'll allow me to use a Christian word. In other words, in Christianity, there's a belief in a trinity. There's unity, but there's also a trinity. And some have argued that in Kabbalah, it's even worse than a trinity. It's a tenfold manifestation of God, not just the threefold manifestation of God. And so true Unitarians, true people who believe that the unity of Hashem has to be emphasized, would perhaps object to this kind of teaching that there are 32 pathways of wisdom, there are 10 sfirot, 10 emanations that come from Hashem, Chachma, Bina, Das, Netzach, Gevura, Tiferes, etc., all of these different sefirot, and they would therefore say, this is perhaps somewhat heretical to ascribe different manifestations of God that emanate down to our world. So one of the statements that you'll find in Sefer Yetzirah, and this is repeated and emphasized throughout Kabbalistic writings, is that despite the multiplicity that is described in the Sefirot, return God to his place. God is the ultimate unity. And despite the manifestations that come from Hashem that seem to imply multiplicity and diversity, God is the true God, as he truly is completely unitary by nature. Yeah.
Aside from this danger that you're talking about, why is it important or helpful or educational or inspiring for us women in Toronto now to know about this?
Well, you affirm God's unity when you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad.
Right.
Why is it that God's unity is the most important
No, that's not
feature.
what I'm asking.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
asking, why is it important for us to learn, okay, we're going through the Kuzari and it's in the Kuzari, but why is it important for us to learn about 10 this and 32 this and 8 this and all these different numbers and things? They're just words. They're not affecting me.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, Rachel. I mean, no, this is a common theme from Rachel, and I appreciate it. So why don't you go ahead?
Well, I mean, that I personally have learned so much connected to Hashem through the Tzitzit, through the animations of what it represents in a very practical way. Like, I can be the best, Hashem Gevurah. I mean, these are the animations that Hashem has given us, that we bring forth into the world. For me, that's been practical. That's why I understand it's a godly source, and I'm put in this world to be, I guess, I'm very inspired.
But you could also learn in the Torah itself how to do chesed. You can learn from halacha, you can learn from stories in the Chumash, you can learn more directly how to behave and how to act than hearing this. I don't want to say mumbo jumbo because I'm so ignorant. To me, it sounds like mumbo jumbo. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I absolutely see what you're saying. But you see, I guess there's a dissonance in my thinking from your thinking because I grew up in the yeshiva system where the objective of learning was not purely utilitarian. Like if I was learning a page from Tractate Sota, right? And I was learning about the technical laws of the Sota, which has absolutely no bearing on my life. The question never arose, like, why is this relevant to my life? Because ultimately there's a belief in Judaism that every segment of Torah is infinitely precious, and therefore you can plumb any part of the Torah, the most mundane or irrelevant part of the Torah, like Va'achot Lotan Timna, the sister of Lotan from Esav's family was a woman named Timna. Now, the Gemara gives that as an example. Like, who cares what his sister's name was, right? And the rabbis basically tell us that even that verse has infinite wisdom contained therein. In some way, it affects me. Now, I may not necessarily know in the most direct way how it affects me. I can only quote, my Rebbe, Reb Simcha Wasserman Zatzal, that he once taught, like he asked the question on Rashi. Rashi tells us something very esoteric about how God created this rakia, this firmament in the heavens between the upper water and the lower water. And he asked that very same question, like, what am I supposed to get out of this? How is this relevant to my life that there's upper water and lower water, and what does it even mean? And his response was that Torah information, at least for Rashi, what he was trying to communicate was information that he felt would nurture and nourish the spiritual part of me. Sometimes that's evident, self-evident, and logical and rational. And sometimes it transcends rationality. It's like when a doctor gives you a pill. Sometimes you know how it's interacting with your body to make you healthy. And other times you swallow the pill and you let it do its work. And so this type of intellectual inquiry into Kabbalistic parts of the Torah, sort of the more transcendent metaphysical parts of the Torah, may not have any bearing. In other words, there may not be even an apparent ethical lesson, although Rachel does find an ethical imperative from it, because when she sees all of the different components of the Sefirot and what each one represents a different midah, a different character trait that can translate into my own life, about how I have to balance, let's say, chesed and gevura, for example. But what we're suggesting is that these kinds of topics even when they don't provide necessarily an immediate practical utilitarian benefit, are very beneficial for us to know as Jews, because it gives us a totality of understanding of what our heritage is all about. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Levi wanted to impart. His whole idea was scientific inquiry is great because it'll help you understand more about the universe. And understanding God's universe is a virtue unto itself. The only departure that he has from, let's say, someone like the Rambam, who's a rationalist, is you don't need scientific inquiry in order to discover the reality of the universe. Look into a book like Sefer Yetzirah, and that'll give you a deeper understanding of how our universe is constructed. So instead of, let's say, subscribing to the atomists, which are one school of Greek philosophy or science, or instead of subscribing to Aristotle, who has a different description of how our universe is constructed, look at Sefer Yetzirah. You'll understand from a traditional Jewish Kabbalistic perspective how our universe is constructed, and that will make you a more wholesome individual because you now have a greater understanding of the very fabric of existence.
I hear what you're saying, but of course I have to say something.
Go right
in
ahead.
rebuttal, which
Go
is,
right ahead.
I feel like doing that is like saying to a 1-year-old baby who can barely walk, now run in the Olympics. I know so little about so many of the basics, and then you want to take me and teach me about something so esoteric. It's way beyond my ken.
I don't agree with you. You're a bubby, right, by this time of your life, right?
Yeah,
You're a grandmother.
yeah.
If I was speaking to you when you were in grade school, I would understand that. You're saying this is well beyond your level, but you're an advanced student by now. You have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of life experience, and there comes a time when we put aside the little Midrash says as our source of all things Jewish, and we look into some deeper texts. That's all we're doing. And we're dabbling. We're not, spending all of our day in this. We're spending a few minutes every week delving into something that's a little bit deeper than perhaps our comfort zone would allow for.
And what about that idea that a person's not supposed to study Kabbalah until they're completely well-versed in the regular Torah?
Well, that's true if you want to make Kabbalah your primary study and you want to go well deep into it. We're just dipping our big toe into the pool. So that's not, and I assume you're 40 already.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so with that, I'm going to put aside our handout on this because we don't have time. Let's just go and discuss very briefly our Parsha for today. Parshas Ki Tavo, the Torah tells us that one of the things that we should do immediately upon entry into the land of Israel is avanim gedolot v'sadata otam basid. The Torah tells us that you shall erect large stones at the border, right by the Jordan River. Put up 12 large stones, like 12 monoliths, and plaster them over. And then the Torah says, this is all in Perek Chaf Zayin, chapter 27 of Deuteronomy, V'chatavta alehen et kol divrei haTorah hazot be'ovrecha. You shall write upon these stones all the words of the Torah as you pass into the land. Leman asher tavo el haaretz, in order that you will be able to successfully come into the land that God is giving you, this land of Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Devash that flows with milk and honey, as God has promised. And once again, the Torah says, V'haya ba'overchem et hayarden, when you pass over the Jordan, takimu et ha'avanim ha'ela, you shall establish these stones that I am giving to you at Har Eval, which means you'll come over, you'll stand on the mountains of Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, you will announce the blessings and the curses, and immediately afterwards you'll erect these monument stones with the Torah written on them, V'sadata otam basid, and once again you will plaster them over with plaster. Now, the interesting thing is that the Torah talks about this idea of plastering both before and after it tells us to write the Torah on it. Now, ostensibly, the function of these stones is just like, when you drive from one province to another or one state to another. It says, it'll say, welcome to Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. You ever drive into Pennsylvania? Or welcome to Ontario? I don't know, what's the motto of Ontario? What?
Yours to discover.
Yours to discover. Okay, there you go. Shows you how much I know about
When you go
Ontario.
into Brooklyn, it says, forget about it.
There you go. Okay. So, you have, when you come into a new place, you have the welcome to, and then here's what we represent. Okay. The idea behind this is that when a foreigner would enter the land of Eretz Yisrael, the entire Torah would be accessible to that visitor so that they would know these are our rules and regulations. If you want to have a successful sojourn in the land of Israel, make sure you know the way, this is what we stand for. These are our credos. This is how we live. Eretz Yisrael is available and open to every person, Jew or non-Jew, but you have to abide by the rules. And if you're a non-Jew, there is no chayd rules that you have to abide by. And that's also contained, whether explicitly or non-explicitly, in the Torah as well. And that's one of the reasons why the Gemara says that when the Torah says, you shall ba'er heitev, which I don't have the text for you over here, but it says, explain it very well. It means that the Torah was written not just in Hebrew on these monolithic stones, but the Torah was written in all 70 languages, so that every person from no matter where they came from would be able to have access to the credos of the Torah. There's an interesting Mishnah in Tractate Sota that tells us that that after they pronounced the blessings and curses on Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, it says, V'achar kach heviu et ha'avanim, they brought the stones, these large stones, ubanu et ha'mizbeach, they built an altar at first out of these stones, v'saduhu basid, they plastered over it, v'katvu alav et kol divrei haTorah b'shivim lashon, and they wrote or inscribed on these stones all of the words of the Torah in 70 different languages. Now, the Talmud, the Gemara, elaborates on this idea that they wrote on these 12 stones the entire Torah. And the Gemara asks the following question. This is in Tractate Sota. Keitzad katvu Yisrael et HaTorah. How did they write the Torah? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, al gabe avanim katvuha. They wrote using a chisel or some kind of stylus. They chiseled into the stones the words of the Torah. Shenemar v'chatavta al ha'avanim. It's called Divrei HaTorah Hazot, as it says, you shall write directly on the stones. V'achar kach sadu otan basid. Then after they chiseled out all the letters, they plastered over it with plaster. Now that seems a little strange, doesn't it? How are you going to be able to read the letters?
So everyone will say that this is like we're given the whole Torah, and then we forget it when we're born.
Okay. So let's see. So this is the discussion in the Talmud. Amar lo Rebbe Shimon. So Rebbe Shimon challenges his colleague Rebbe Yehuda, and he says, "Lidvarecha heich lamdu umot shaloto hazman haTorah." How did the other nations learn the Torah if it was covered over and plastered over? Like, what's the point? Amar lo. So he said to him, Bina yetera natan bahem hakadosh baruch hu. God gave the other nations of that time additional wisdom, additional discernment and understanding, that they would figure out that hidden beneath that plaster were the letters of the Torah. V'shigru notirin, and so they sent scribes, shalahen, v'kilfu et hasid v'hisiuha, and they scraped off the plaster, and they were able to read the letters that were underneath. They inscribed them, they copied them, they brought back the copies to their respective countries. And this is why the other nations who had some kind of interchange, some kind of contact with the Jewish people, were judged and condemned by God because they had the ability to learn the Torah and they failed to do so. But that's Rebbe Yehuda's response. Rebbe Shimon, however, disagrees, and he says, Al gabe sid katfuha. He says that I don't accept that. I believe that the Torah the stones rather, were first covered over by plaster, and instead of chiseling the letters on hard stone, they used a soft stylus to inscribe the letters in soft plaster, which is much more logical when you think about it, right? So we have this machlokes, and he adds that they wrote on the bottom of these stones that the other nations should not teach the Jewish people to do the wrong thing, but instead they should learn from the Jews. And if any nation wanted to repent and become pious like the Jewish people, they would be accepted. Now, it still is bothersome. Why then, according to Rebbe Yehuda, why would God need to grant Bina Yetera, additional understanding, like some kind of intuition or instinct? When the visitors would come from foreign lands, God imbued them with a special instinct. I need to scrape off the plaster to be able to get to the letters underneath. Like, why? Why would God set it up that way? Why not subscribe to Rabbi Shimon's system where the letters are right out there, open and exposed? So you could answer very simply that this is out of a regard and out of reverence for the letters of the Torah. It's not respectful to something that is so precious to be out in the open. And God wanted the letters of the Torah to be well preserved and to be honored, just like we wouldn't keep a Torah scroll out in the open, but we keep it in an ark covered by a Torah cover and then closed inside an ark and locked and protected. Maybe that's the message that Rebbe Yehuda is communicating. But I want to share with you an idea that is based on the fact that there are only two places in all of Talmudic literature where we have this concept of Bina Yetera. You ever hear that term, Bina Yesera? Bina Yetera? That women have a Bina
Women
Yesera.
have it, yes.
There you go. That you probably have heard this from your teachers, that women have a Bina Yesera. Now, where does this come from, that women have a Bina Yesera? So this comes from Masechet Nida. The Mishnah talks about how girls age more precociously than boys. A girl becomes bas mitzvah at the age of 12. And so the Mishnah says that even already at the age of 11, she may have some level of wisdom. So if she makes a vow, sometimes the vow may be binding up to a year before her bas mitzvah, which is at 12 years of age. But for boys, a boy's vow can only be taken seriously into his 13th year after he turns 12, and up until the bar mitzvah to the age of 13. And this is the source text for how we know that girls are bas mitzvah 1 year before boys. And the question is, why is it that the age of what's the word I'm looking for? Of the age of maturity is for girls 1 year before it is for boys. The Rambam has a fascinating explanation. Well, it's obvious for you, but the Rambam in his Mishnah commentary says something fascinating. Va'asu gil hanikevot la'onat dedarim lamata migil hagvarim. The reason why the age of girls' maturation for, let's say, purposes of vows and other aspects of intellectual maturity is 1 year earlier than a boy's is mipnei sheyemei chayehen pachot miyemei chayei hagvarim al harov, is because life expectancy for women is lower than life expectancy for men. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of objections from the live crowd here because they're all telling me that women Statistically, ask any actuary or any life insurance company, and they will tell you that you go to Miami. You don't even have to go to a life insurance actuary table. Go to Miami, and you'll see that there are a lot more widows than widowers. Okay, that's the reality. So, but that was not the case in medieval times. In medieval times, lots of women died sadly in childbirth, died of disease, and many other things. And so the life expectancy for women was actually shorter than that of men. And that's why they are granted, let's say, coming of age a year earlier, because we don't expect them to live that long. But that's not the position of the Talmud itself. That's the Rambam's rational explanation. What's the reason that's offered by the Gemara itself? Tanu Rabbanan, Elu Divrei Rebbe, that Rebbe is of the opinion that there's a disparity between boys and girls of coming of age. So my time of the Rebbe, what is his reason? Dichsiv vayiven Hashem Elokim et hatzela, that God constructed from the side of man, he created woman. Now that word vayiven is to construct, but it also comes from the shoresh, which is the same one as bina, as discernment. Melamed shenatan hakadosh baruch hu bina yetera biisha yoter mibaish. This teaches that God gave extra discernment or wisdom to women more than to men. Now, of course, you have to sort of ask yourself the question, why did God give women greater wisdom than men, or greater bina, whatever that word, however you're going to translate the word bina? Why? Why did God do that? Now, look at it in the context of the creation of woman. Woman is created from man's side. There is a sense of subservience that the woman has to the man. It would seem to me that the reason why God gives Bina Yetera to women is to compensate for their social subservience to the man. How is a woman going to maneuver around the domineering male in her life? Through Bina Yetera. It's very simple. I mean, and this is whatever you want to call this, whether it's sexist or whatever negative connotation you want to assign to it. I'm trying to just understand the simple import of what the Talmud is trying to teach. Women have Bina Yetera. Why? Why did God create this disparity? The answer to me seems because on a social level, from the societal level, men dominate women physically and socially. And so therefore, women need to have some kind of counterbalance to that for self-preservation and to be able to have some level of independence. And that's why God gives the woman Bina Yetera, to be able to maneuver, so that when a man comes home and he's in a grumpy mood, the woman knows exactly what to say and how to deal with it because she has Bina Yetera.
Very
what? Okay, so I don't know. That's what I would get out of it. Now, for this last idea, if we translate that to what we're learning about in the Talmud over here about Bina Yetera, it seems to me that God gives Bina Yetera to the other nations of the world to be able to know that the Torah is accessible to them. In other words, the Torah was written, it was custom made for the Jewish people. That doesn't mean, however, that it's inaccessible to the other nations of the world. It may be prima facie a closed book to the other nations of the world. But just like God gives woman Bina Yetera to compensate for her disadvantage, God gives Bina Yetera to the other nations to compensate for their disadvantage vis-a-vis the Jews and their access to the Torah. And that, I think, is the message of Rebbe Yehuda. He's trying to explain to us that the other nations may have a legitimate argument, an excuse, why they didn't live a life of virtue like the Jewish people. Well, we didn't have access to the Torah. The response to that is, God says, I gave you Bina Yetera. I gave you the insight and the instinct to know that there's something should have stirred within you to know to seek out the Jews and their Torah in order to arrive at truth. And I'm just going to leave you with this final idea. It seems to me that so much of the hatred and the anti-Semitism that's in the world today, especially from Israel's immediate neighbors, is that resentment that arrives from the Bina Yetera that is just below the surface. That Bina Yetera that sort of discerns subconsciously or instinctively, whatever you want to call it, that there's some kernel of truth that lies within the Jewish people. And that creates tremendous resentment and animosity and hatred that I have to go to somebody else, to some other nation, to be able to arrive at the truth. It is the source of so much hatred against the Jewish people. That is why our sages say that the word Sinai, which is the name of the place where the Jews got the Torah, derives from the word Sinah, from the word hatred. That is the true source of the hatred against the Jewish people. It is why there is such a distortion of culture within the Palestinian world today. They would rather kill Jews than form their own nationhood. Because so great is that sinah, the closer you are to the Jewish people geographically, the greater the hatred becomes and the resentment is. And we have to understand that, and we have to learn how to continue combating that anti-Semitism, no matter where we find it in the world. Understand them, because the better we can understand it, the better we'll be able to combat it. And with that, I apologize, but I have to go. Wishing you a great week. Bezrat Hashem, we'll meet next time as well. Take care.